Archive X. Ilyas Truth by X. Stelmack.
The claw of the horizon glided silently through the cold void of space, its emerald hull glittering in the light of the massive blue supergiant it was orbiting. In contrast, the wreck it had located was pockmarked and gray, its battered hull weathered from millions of years' worth of cosmic radiation, micrometeoroid impacts, and thermal stress. Yet the markings on its side were still discernible, emblazoned in a text that far predated the sentience of the Saurosapient species. Vakira cocked her head to one side, unable to keep from trilling with excitement. The ancient starship was not only of the Star People, but by the looks of it, pre-Q in design. Never before had an artifact of such antiquity been discovered, and her mind raced at the thought of what knowledge might lay within.
Chief Archivist,
Chirped the helmsman from below.
magnetic clamps ready for docking. We'll be as gentle with it as we can, but from its condition, it looks like we'll have to cut our way in once it's secured.
Vakira flicked her tail in acknowledgement, her gaze never leaving the ancient ship. She could feel the weight and glory and horrors of history pressing against her. The history of the Star People having been her passion almost since she was hatched. Their incredible utopia, once having stretched across an entire spiral arm of the galaxy, had been ruthlessly eradicated by the Q's atrocities. Yet this relic of their once thriving civilization lingered, perhaps the last tiny fragment of that forgotten age. The ship shuddered slightly as the docking clamps engaged, and without delay, Vakira led her team into the airlock. Arvak, the ship's engineer priest and commanding officer, moved close behind her, the glyph branded on his forehead, reflecting both the authority and seniority of his position. Normally, someone of his status wouldn't be part of a boarding team, but this event was far too momentous for him to miss.
Do you think its interior is still intact?
She asked, her voice laced with anticipation as they suited up.
By the looks of things, it should be,
Arvak replied.
but no telling what condition its contents are in. It's been floating through space so long it's probably been as cold as the void and as hot as an oven in there, freezing and baking for thousands of years at a time. Doubt anything is going to be in good condition.
Then, we must be very careful.
Said Vakira, watching as Arvak commenced with the operation. After several minutes of precision, cutting the airlock hissed open, revealing the ship's dark interior. Their suit lights pierced the gloom as the two of them floated inside, casting long shadows on the stained and pitted walls. For centuries, the interior had been slowly decayed by moisture and bacteria, but now everything was as dry as dust. Any atmosphere the ship had once contained having long since leaked away into the vacuum of space. Good news for preservation. And as they explored, there was indeed much that had survived. Most of the ship was at least superficially intact, and within ancient cryopods they even discovered the fragmentary remains of the original crew's skeletons. Though any magnetically recorded information on the vessel's computers had long since been lost, they were delighted to find diamond-based drives capable of holding data for the better part of an eon, a potential treasure trove of historical and scientific knowledge, assuming they could be deciphered. Slowly, delicately, and meticulously, they moved through the ship, recording and examining every inch of it, until at last they came to a sealed doorway, prominently marked with a strange symbol resembling 3 circles, all joined in the center by a 4th. Equipment had to be carefully moved in to cut through it, but soon enough it too was opened, revealing the last secrets of the vessel. Together, Vakira and Arvak peered inside with their lights, eyes growing wide as they perceived the horror the Star People had preserved within. Together, they resealed the door as fast as they were able,
You are sworn to silence.
said Arvak, his normally authoritative voice now sounding more like a whimper.
None of the crew are to know what we found. Everything we recorded is to be erased. Do you understand?
Vakira's tail quivered in agreement, though she was trembling so badly in fear that it was hard to tell. Whether she kept her mouth shut or not, it was almost a certainty that they were all already doomed. It was almost 10 years later when the high patriarchs of the Sora Sapiens Empire formally convened to discuss the ship. But the delay wasn't because the matter was of trivial concern. Far the opposite. The relic contained a discovery of such importance that research into it had to be conducted at the very highest levels of secrecy. Almost the entire crew of the Claw of the Horizon had been quickly and quietly euthanized upon their return, including engineer priest Arvak, who had reported the findings. Only Vakira had been spared. Her insignificance in the social hierarchy and expertise in the history of the Star People, making her the only one both feasible and worthy to keep. She entered the chamber once they were all seated, and the room had been thoroughly locked down, baring her throat to them as a sign of submission before beginning her presentation.
The diamond drives have been largely deciphered, the specimens studied and dissected. There's still many details we don't yet know, but at last we know the name and the purpose, and the story of the ship we found. If it pleases you, I shall recount all.
The Supreme Patriarch flicked his tail, and Vakira began.
The ship was known as the Ilyas. In her time, she was a military vessel of immense speed and power and might, crewed by the most competent warriors of the Star People. So exceptional were they that, for a brief time, they were able to stand against the Q and even inflict significant damage upon them. These weapons are still being studied and have already afforded us immense breakthroughs in defensive technology. That said, when it became apparent that the fight was lost, the Ilyas was ordered to flee into deep space in an effort to preserve all that had been learned of the Q, to give the descendants of the Star People, as well as species like our own, a fighting chance against their threat.
The Supreme Patriarch leaned forward.
And do these weapons and this knowledge do that?
He asked. Vakira hesitated for a moment, then doing her best to suppress the despair in her soul, replied as simply and honestly as she could.
No, but it revealed just how great a threat the Q remain.
There was a long, deathly silence before the Patriarch spoke again.
Explain.
The crew of the Ilyas managed to capture one of the Q, the preserved remains of which we found in the sealed chamber. Within that specimen, we found a surgically implanted organ akin to a secondary brain, which the scientists of the ship were somehow able to access when the creature was still alive. All that they downloaded from that secondary brain they then stored on the diamond drives we recovered. Some of the story we already knew, of the golden age when the Star People spanned 50,000 light years, their civilizations thriving, of how the Q came from another arm of the galaxy, not to conquer in the traditional sense, but to mutilate and desecrate in the most vile ways imaginable. But what we didn't know up till now is why the Q came, why they inflicted the unspeakable cruelties they did upon the Star People.
Then why?
Asked one of the Patriarchs. Vakira drew in a trembling breath, her jaw tightening as she prepared to speak the truth that had haunted her for the better part of a decade. The truth that her crew had been murdered to conceal.
Because of that surgically implanted second brain. Originally, the Q had minds more akin to ours. They could think and form opinions independently, had a sense of morality and a conscience and neuroplasticity. But in their fervor to perfect themselves, they created a standardized, mass-produced mind that regimented them into a collective consciousness. Though each Q still had its own memories and experiences, the second brain made it impossible to interpret anything except through the lens of their religion. Though masters of change in others, they could no longer adapt themselves. And why would they need to? According to their teachings, they had already reached the peak of perfection. Simply put, we now know the Q will never change. 1 billion years can pass, and their minds will remain crystalline. There will never be any reasoning with them, or bargaining with them, or appealing to their sense of mercy. Should we encounter them at any point in the future, we can expect their actions to be exactly the same.
Assuming they even still exist.
Pointed out one of the patriarchs.
They do.
Replied Vakira. The room erupted in a cacophony of hisses of shock and confusion, but the Supreme Patriarch raised a claw, silencing his peers with a sharp, commanding gesture before motioning for her to continue.
Their regimentation has effectively made them a migratory species. They circle the galaxy again and again, reshaping it with every pass. By our calculations, they've already done so at least 7 times, so it's extremely likely that, in time, they'll return. The chance of such a species having gone extinct is negligible.
The room fell silent again, the weight of her revelation suffocating. One of the younger patriarchs leaned forward, his voice quivering.
So where are they now?
Vakira's gaze dropped to the floor, her tail coiled tightly around her legs as if to shield herself.
The Ilyas scientists believed the migration slowed or quickened, depending on how many sentient species the Q encountered, and how much resistance each species presented. They could still be millions of years from reaching us, or they could be entering our territories tomorrow.
The Supreme Patriarch fixed his gaze on Vakira, eyes intense as twin embers.
Chief Archivist,
He said, his voice low and steady.
what do the diamond drives suggest we do? Did the Star People leave any guidance? Offer any hope?
Vakira's claws dug into her palms as she answered.
The drives contained 2 conclusions. The first was a warning: remain silent. The Star People learned that communication and expansion only draw the Q faster. Stealth will delay them, but their migration cannot be stopped, not even by the Q themselves.
And the second?
The Supreme Patriarch pressed. She hesitated, taking a moment to recover her voice.
Prepare your species to be remembered. There will be others after you.
For a long moment, the patriarchs said nothing, the enormity of the revelation hanging over them like a shadow. The Supreme Patriarch finally stood, his tail coiling with grim determination.
Seal this knowledge. Let none outside this chamber learn of it.
But what of hope?
Asked one of the elder patriarchs.
Surely there must be some way to defend.
Even if the Q arrive 1,000 years from now, there will be no defense.
The Supreme Patriarch interrupted, his voice like cold iron.
Our technology is laughable compared to theirs, and even if we could stand as equals, they'd drown us in their numbers. For the foreseeable future, it is our primary duty to ensure the legacy of our people is preserved, just as the Star People's was. Vakira, you will lead the efforts to safeguard our history and science, to make sure that, should the Q arrive before we are ready, all we have discovered shall be passed on to those species who succeed us.
Vakira bowed her head, the weight of the title crushing her. She knew what it meant: isolation, secrecy, and the knowledge that she would carry this burden alone until her dying breath. As she left the chamber, she felt the distant, haunting pull of the Ilyas Truth. The void was vast, but not empty, and somewhere, far beyond the reach of their most advanced sensors, the Q moved ever closer.
Like and subscribe for more horror and mystery stories.